We move now to Capitol Hill. We are pleased to be joined by Congressman Jeff Flake, a Republican from Arizona, who's also running for Senate next year. And Congressman, I want to start with an issue that the president addressed yesterday. It's the border issue. He made the case that the administration has successfully addressed border security problems, and it's time to take on comprehensive reform. What did you make of that speech? Is there any chance of comprehensive reform reviving itself in this Congress?
Well, I would have liked the president to have gone to Arizona rather than Texas. If he'd gone to the Tucson sector, he would have noted that the Border Patrol's own figures say that for every illegal alien that is apprehended, 3 go free. So that's hardly control of the border. And if we want comprehensive reform, you've got to have border security first, and the president just won't acknowledge that.
Though, Congressman Flake, you have in the past been an advocate for having some sort of comprehensive immigration reform. Are you suggesting, though, that now it's not the time to do this?
Well, until we have better border security, nobody's going to trust the federal government to move ahead on the other elements. Believe me, and many others have pushed this issue for a decade now and have beaten our head against the wall. Because nobody trusts the federal government to move ahead while you still have a border situation like you have in the Tucson sector that is just basically a sieve with people coming through all the time, and increasingly a more violent situation at the border. We had a rancher killed last year. You have armed people coming across frequently. It's just a situation that until we address, we can't move on to the other elements.
Congressman, let's talk spending. I know you've been a fiscal hawk and railing against wasteful spending for years and years and years in Congress. You must feel like you've got some more company up on Capitol Hill these days. But Speaker Boehner earlier this week said he needs to see trillions, not billions, in cuts. I'm curious, from your perspective, I assume that you agree with him on that, but how quickly do those trillions have to come? When you think trillions of cuts, are we talking 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Oh, we do need trillions of cuts. The Ryan budget was $6.5 trillion, I believe, over 12 years. We've got to have something at least on that order, if not more. I think that we ought to have a downward slope on spending steeper than that. I voted for the Republican Study Committee budget, which would balance in 5 years. So I'm sorry, in 9 years. So we've got to cut. It's got to be trillions, and we've got to have reforms attached to this debt limit increase, or we shouldn't raise it.
You have also been an advocate of getting rid of earmarks and cutting spending in other areas. One big issue on the table right now, going on right behind you, is the debate over oil for subsidies for oil and gas companies. You think that should be on the table? That the federal government should stop subsidizing the oil and gas industry?
I think we need to get rid of all these corporate subsidies. I don't think the oil and gas industry should have any benefits that any other corporation doesn't have in terms of depreciation of assets or whatever else. They should have no less and no more. And so obviously we ought to look at a lot of the corporate subsidies. Ethanol, that's just horrible what we're doing there to the environment and to the taxpayer. And our ag subsidies across the board, you name it. We've got to do a lot of work in that area. But to single out oil and gas and say we're somehow going to solve the budget problem just by doing that, that's a bit far-fetched. But yes, let's address all corporate subsidies.
You know, we've heard a lot of buzz around that, and you're not the first member of Congress who's mentioned this idea of eliminating all subsidies. What's your sense of a time frame? Is there going to be a bill that does that? Do you know from the Speaker's office, from leadership office, is there going to be a vote that says, let's get rid of all energy subsidies?
Well, we have the appropriation cycle coming up, and for the first time in 4 years, we'll actually have an open rule on appropriation bills. So members of Congress can express themselves on the floor of the House in terms of amendments to limit spending for this or limit spending for that. And so I would expect that you'll see some of these efforts manifested in that way. But now that we're in charge, I think Republicans in general are in favor of lowering overall tax rates, but getting rid of some of the tax expenditures, the credits, the deductions, in order for us to do that, so we can bring in more revenue but have lower tax rates.
So we can expect you to introduce that then?
Oh yeah, I've introduced legislation with regard to corporate subsidies over the years, whether it's ag subsidies or ethanol. We've had a couple of amendments actually pass in that regard, but I'll include the subsidies that oil and gas gets and everybody else. No, we shouldn't be doing these corporate subsidies at all. But I have to say, kind of what's being said on the other side in terms of what are subsidies and what are not, they're I think including a lot of things that every business, every corporation has, that the oil and gas industry has as well, and you wouldn't want to put them at a disadvantage to others.
All right, Congressman Jeff Flake, Republican of Arizona, thanks for being here on Top Line. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.